Welcome to this episode of DIY3DTech.com. In this episode, we're going to be doing the shootout between the Creality CR-10 and the new JG AURORA A5 update. So this is the video you guys have been looking for. So now, one of the things in this video I've done is I've really gone into a lot of detail as far as looking at a number of the features between each printer. Each printer also came from GearBest, because I know I've had really a humorous time, and thank you to all you haters out there who have written me calling me a liar and all kinds of other names. It's just hilarious, some of the comments you get out there. But anyways, I just want to again set the stage. Both printers came from GearBest. Now, also, I think it's important to understand the Creality has been highly modified. And this is, I think, one of the important pieces. So Creality highly modified, JG AURORA A5 out of the box stock. No modifications at all. I've simply leveled the bed, put it to work. So when we look at some of these, I'm going to comment on these because this is not an even Steven comparison. So anyways, let's get into it. And one of the pieces that I've done is I've really looked at the full dynamic of this, but I want to start out with sort of a feature performance list and kind of lay this out for you. And it might not be as exciting as you want, but I did really strive to make this as empirical as possible. You know, again, for those haters out there, I want to make sure that I get the facts out there and nothing but the facts, as Joe Friday would say. So let's take a look right at the start, cost. So as I'm producing this right now, the Creality CR-10 is about $359.99, where the JG AURORA A5 is about $365.99 on GearBest. So basically a $6 difference between the two printers. Not a lot of money, practically the same cost. Now, excuse me, the other thing I wanted to look at is modability. How easy is each one to mod? And I rated the Creality, you know, high, because obviously it's highly modifiable because of its nature, whereas the modifiability, while possible, is rather low on the Aurora. So from here on in, I'll probably just refer to it as the Aurora. It's too long to say JG AURORA A5 update. You get the picture. So now the next thing is aesthetics. So I rated the aesthetics of the two. So, you know, Maker Rail kind of, be quite frank, kludgy looking CR-10 versus the very attractive Aurora, you know. So the way I look at this, if I had a business and I was bringing clients in, what would I want them to see? The CR-10 or the Aurora? Definitely the Aurora is what I would want them to be seeing. So I gave the CR-10 a 5, I gave the Aurora a 9. I think there's some things on the Aurora that could be a little bit better, and I'm always hesitant to give full 10s. I don't think it's perfect, but I think obviously it is much better than the CR-10 from an aesthetic point of view. Interface. So the interface, the CR-10 has the micro SD card. I think everybody knows if you've got a CR-10, whereas the Aurora uses a thumb drive. I really, really like that. I know it's a simple thing, but that is just so nice. You know, these fingers fumbling with a micro SD card, kind of crazy. I really like this. Just FYI, it's got to be FAT32. Will not work with a FAT formatted card or thumb drive. Must be FAT32. Not a biggie, but just wanted to point that out. Host interface, both of them have a USB host interface to connect to a computer. Yes and yes. Now, here's where we get down to a little bit more of the brass tacks. Size. So basically the Aurora is slightly bigger in the X and Y than the Creality. Now this is a little bit important, I think, because at 300 by 300 you're not going to be able to print 12 by 12 on the Creality. You can, with the extra 5 millimeters on each side, you can basically get a 12 millimeter platined object on the Aurora. I think this is important. And now you might say, you know, 5, oh, it's not that big. Now, a lot of people have written and said, but Joe, it's 80 millimeters less on the Z. Yes, it is. It is 80 millimeters less on the Z, and if you need more Z travel, then obviously the Aurora is not the right printer for you. So that is one of the shortcomings. I personally want to print bigger from a plat standpoint, or, you know, from a bed standpoint than I do height-wise. So, you know, if you're going to print low poly Pikachus or vases, you know, yeah, I guess you need that, or trash cans. Most of the stuff I print is larger in the XY dimension than is Z. I have never ever printed to the top of the Z on that, but you may, in your case, may be different. I'm just kind of hitting what is the average out there that I've seen. So that is the one big thing, 80 millimeters short on the Z. However, when we come back down here and we look at it, Z motors, the Creality 1 motor, the Aurora 2 motors. I think this is important. Now, a lot of people have written me saying, oh, you know, I've had no problems with my 1-axis Z. I really haven't had it either. Which is going to be better? No question, the 2. I've gone through this with the Tarantula. I've gone from 1 motor to 2. While it was okay with the 1, it is better with the 2. Is it worth it, or is it required? Would I make the modification in my CR-10? No, for what it is. Now, if I'm going to be doing something maybe high resolution, blah, 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 yeah, I might go the extra motor. But I think this is a nice, important feature, and I think this is economically an important feature to keep in mind, because up here, remember, we're $6 off. You go add another Z-axis, you're going to blow it out of the water adding that other axis. Plus, you have to do the work yourself. So anyways, I think that's a big caveat. The other piece is the bed. So the Creality comes with a glass bed. The Aurora comes with a black diamond bed. I tell you what, guys, I love this bed. I've printed a ton on this thing. I love the black diamond bed. I like it better than PI. Now, caveat here. You can't scrape it. You can't get, you know, a thing underneath it to pop it off. You know, I'm looking for something. You can't take one of these. No, no, no. You have to wait for it to cool down, and it just pops off on its own. If you try scraping it off, you will damage the bed. Be forewarned. But it's got a heck of a grip. So I really like the black diamond. So that is a huge plus in my book. Noise. It is noisier. So I did use meter. I did measure it. I took averages for both the Creality and the Aurora. Now, I measured about 2 decibels difference. And to be honest, it's not quite totally fair. I do think the Aurora is louder, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But because the box is separate from the printer, it was hard to get the same sound envelope. I really experimented with this one because I wanted to get it right. And I do feel that 2 decibels is about the difference. Now, why is it louder? I think that, at least in mine, they're overdriving, or they're sending too much current to the steppers. I think the steppers could be, the drivers could be turned down, and it would be a lot quieter, and I think it actually print better. And I'll talk about a little bit more about that at the end of this video. The other piece, display. You have a monochrome display on the CR-10. You have a color display on the Aurora. Now, it might not be a big thing to you, but again, if I'm going to present this in a business setting, or if I'm Joe average home user, this is a nice feature, folks, especially because the color coding of the icons. Very important. So you might poo-poo this one off, but I tell you what, when you get older eyes like I do, having color indicators, very important, nice feature. The other piece is knob versus touchscreen. The CR-10, you have to turn a knob. Here, you just touch the screen. It has a capacitive touchscreen. And again, base price is only $6 more. This is a very nice feature, folks. I really, really like this. Coming down, intelligent bed leveling, or semi-intelligent bed leveling. As you saw in the last video, it's not that great, but for Joe average user, it is good, because Joe average user doesn't have to think about it. He hits a button, it goes to the position, take the paper, done deal. So I like that fact. Is it a deal maker or breaker? No, but I think it's a nice feature to have. The next thing, loss of power. Now, this is a little bit dual-edged sword. So obviously the Creality doesn't have it. At least this version I have doesn't. Maybe you can reflash it, I don't know, but I'm just kind of taking stock out of the box, whereas this does. Now, this is sort of a nice feature, but it does have an Achilles tendon to it, and I'll talk about that again at the end of the video. The other piece, Wi-Fi. So, Creality, no. Aurora, yes. What do you do with it? I haven't found anybody that does anything with it yet, but I think it's an option for the future, and maybe third parties can adapt to it. It does create some sort of access point on its own. So I think it's a neat feature. Again, deal maker breaker, no, but it does have it. Extruder, 3D printed on the CR-10, and I'm going to move this list up a little bit. In a commercial one on the Aurora, which is actually a gapless one. I like the extruder. I think the extruder on the Aurora is a very, very nice feature in comparison to stock ones. Now, I haven't tried multiple, you know, for example, flexible filaments, things like that with it in it yet, but I think that'll work. You know, again, I'm trying to keep this more so as sort of a straight up test as far as everything else, because the Hotend, you know, goes up to I think what, 270 or something. I'll put it down below, but it gets warm enough for everything, and it does everything pretty much else that, you know, the CR-10 does. So I don't really want to get into the different type of filaments yet. Those will be future. So again, frame construction, you know, maker rail bolted together, kind of kludgy. I got to be honest with you, I don't have a problem with it. I built tons of printers out of maker rail. I've got the Tron XC. I love it, but you know, when you look at it, again, going back to the aesthetics, it is a bit kludgy versus the stamped metal of the Aurora. So again, if you have a business and you're wanting to bring clients in and wow them with something, Aurora over CR-10, Aurora, at least my book, wins. So I talked about gapless feeding system. That kind of goes back to the extruder. I'm liking the extruder. I've done a lot of printing with it so far, and I like the feed. Now, again, I haven't done, you know, detailed, you know, what's the feed settings and everything, because you can adjust all of that. So whatever it is out of the box doesn't really matter, because the same thing goes for the CR-10, is you can adjust it. So you know, again, you can change the micro stepping and everything. So all of it has the base ability, so I'm not going to get into that being that anal. What, again, I'm just trying to reinforce I'm looking at is what are the pieces that make rudimentary differences. Now, filament out switch, no on the Creality, yes on the Aurora. I think that's a nice feature for Joe Average. Having the filament out switch, nice feature. Now, here's where we get into some more interesting stuff. So I ran some tests, and we're going to see some videos of those tests in time lapse, because they're hours long. But the piece is, so what I did is I measured on average. Now you see, and I'll talk about these, I printed a lot of stuff and I used all common denominators in my testing. And so bed heat up times. So the Creality, the Creality, which I've highly modified, you've seen the videos on it, heats up in 5.5 minutes to 70 degrees C. The Aurora does it in 4.2 minutes. The Hotend heats up to 210 in 1.95 minutes, where the Aurora does it in 1.45. Now, what this tells me is that the Aurora has a bit better power setup system. Now, I haven't taken the case apart to look at it, but this is just all indicative. Now, I think there are improvements which can be made here, because again, I think you could put some thin insulation like I did in the original Creality deal, because there's not a lot of room underneath that bed, and you could actually improve this number here and probably get it down to maybe 3.5. So again, I think there's some advantages there. And it's clear that it heats up, starts, and runs faster from this aspect. Now, what we're going to do is, you know, for the next phase, which I'm going to show some time lapse, is, you know, how did, you know, what to print. So one of the things I said to myself, I said, Joe, what would Chuck do? And the first thing that came to mind, Chuck would print a pawn. So that's what I did. I used Chuck's pawn, went to Thingiverse, downloaded it. Thank you, Chuck. and one of the reasons, again, joking aside, I wanted to use the pawn is Chuck's done a lot of printer reviews, so I wanted to use a common denominator, and I would like to denote the pawn to be the common denominator for all printer testing in the future, because again, Chuck's done it, I'm going to do it with this, and this way you can take a look at this pawn. You know the STL is the same as Chuck uses. You can compare it to his printers he reviews. You can compare it to my printers I review, and you can kind of get an idea. I like this too because it doesn't get too crazy, but yet it covers all the components one would expect to 3D print. So as you can see, I just have some of them here. This has been an exhaustive test. Both printers have been printing over 2 days for various aspects of these pawns. So the white one, now I used the filament, actually the junky filament that came in the box with it, and it's not too bad. I shouldn't call it junky, but it's not as good as the Hatchbox filament I used on the CR-10. The CR-10, also keep in mind, has an expensive nozzle on it and has been upgraded. So again, this is not apples to apples. So when we look at some of this, I think it's important. So one of the things that I want to do is go to the time-lapse video. Now, again, I did this video. This is going to be an aggregated video. I did this like half dozen times. You can see all the chess pieces, and this is not even all of them. And I took the averages for a lot of these statistics that I came up with, and also I wanted to see repeatability. Does this thing have repeatability? We know the Creality does, but just to keep the control the same, I ran the Creality, I ran the Aurora, blah blah blah. Anyways, it does. So in the video, what you're going to see, which is rather interesting, is what I do is I take chess pawn on each one, send it to it, press the buttons roughly the same time, start the camera, and let it run through. Now I'll zoom in on the chess pieces. It won't be that great, but I tell you what, we'll come back and we'll talk about what you see. So tell you what, let's get over to the video and take a look at the video. Okay, so you guys saw it print, and now a couple interesting things I want to talk about that we saw as part of that. The first piece is the heat up time. You saw that the Aurora started before the Creality. Now, be very careful with the timeline because I shot it in a compressed timeline. or as a time lapse, and then I did a time lapse on that, so the times aren't totally linear inside there. So kind of keep that in mind. So what I did do is I actually wrote down all the timings. I used the stopwatch on all the different runs to kind of measure it, and these are actually averages. Some were a little bit longer, some were a little bit shorter, but on average of all these runs. So you see that roughly, that there's roughly a minute or so on the bed and about half a minute, so pretty close to 2 minutes difference of when the Creality starts versus when the Aurora starts. So the Aurora clearly starts before, but the Aurora actually runs out 158 seconds longer on average than the Creality did. So I found that rather interesting. Now, you're going to ask, what slicer and all that? So I used the same STL. I used Cura, and I simply switched machines. Now when I did these tests, I did them at a uniform temperature, but this PLA that comes with it, I had to print at 200, where this required 210 to print correctly. So there was a 10-degree difference for the filaments that I had to accomplish, but I simply switched machines in Cura by going to machine, switching machine, and just changing the temperature. All retractions, motion speeds, everything else were kept the same. So, in this comparison, and I also took out, you notice the Creality runs my cleanup routine at the beginning. Now, the interesting piece is the Aurora would not run that cleanup G code, so I used the standard Cura startup G code at the front of it, and I adjusted the times for the extra time the Creality had to take to run that. So anyways, for some reason the Creality is about 158 seconds faster in printing this pawn, which I found interesting, than the Aurora. I think part of it has to do with, I think it's running Marlin, the Aurora, and I think it's the way it's handling arcs, because one of the pieces I want to do is I want to put up, I took these pieces under a microscope, this USB microscope right here, and I looked at them under that microscope, and I took, in comparison, I'll do overlay here. So you'll see the red and the white, obviously red, Creality, white, Aurora. And the interesting thing is, and it might be hard to tell on the video and on just the overlay, but in the high res image, which I'll put down below, a link to it, you can see basically the lines, they line up. It's amazing. However, I do notice that there is, and I'm not sure why, but I need to probably back up for this part. So the G-code interpreter in the firmware, when it receives a command to do an arc, it has a mathematical algorithm to perform that arc. And so one of the things you'll notice in the Aurora G-code, or sorry, the Aurora image under the microscope, is it's a little bit slightly more squared off. Now, I really had to look at this and measure it because of the color. And I'll do black and white. So I removed the hues from the sample image, and I'll do an overlay of that also. But they're also there in the Creality. But the way the Creality in its version of firmware handles an arc, which you see at the top of the pawn, is better than what the Aurora is. Now, I want to be very careful when I say this, because the reason for that is software. It is not the hardware. If you look at the hardware, and this is the one thing that I think folks miss about FDM printers, they're all the same. A Cartesian FDM printer, as long as you have quality materials, they're all the same. So you have an X, a Y, and a Z stepper. You have Acme lead screws that take it up. It's very hard to get something that's totally different. This is why, to me, price is so important. So I don't know if this is a fundamental aspect of the steppers being overdriven, because I really believe the steppers in the Aurora are driving too much current. I think they need to be turned down. Also, I've had a lot of people tell me that you need to upgrade to the latest version of Marlin in the on the Aurora, and I haven't done that. This is straight out of the box. I want to approach this just as Joe Average would, and I don't expect Joe Average to reflash in 3D printer just coming right out of the box. Actually, I don't expect Joe Average to reflash a 3D printer, period, because this is probably one of the top questions I get on my channel, is how to reflash a printer. So anyways, that is probably about the one kind of clear difference between the two. Now, in the future, I am going to reflash this and I'm going to repeat this test. But on the other side of it, this is so minute, you can't see it with the naked eye. You literally have to look and see the delta with a microscope. Now, the other thing is, it's not without some of the other problems. Now, one of the things I mentioned that there's a little bit of an Achilles heel, and I'll put this up in the corner with it, is the power on. With the power on restart. For some reason, this thing sometimes decides it didn't finish its last job, and as you can see, kind of restarts at the top of something. Now, one of the pieces that I think is the problem here is the stock startup or start G code of Cura. I find if I put a forced home command, which usually there is at the top, which I don't understand, but if I home the unit first after a print, I don't have that problem. So it's only been when I've finished a print, removed it, hit the button, and had it start again. And it's been about 50-50, so probably 2 out of 5 times this has occurred. So this is the piece that I find a little bit interesting, and again, I think the firmware might have a few bugs in it. But outside of that, this is all I have found with this. And again, at a $6 difference, I tell you what, I really do think this has the ability to be the CR-10 killer. With the 80 millimeters aside. If you don't need that 80 millimeters for something, I think this is the CR-10 killer, because I can take this printer and with its dual access, I can update the Marlin firmware. I can turn down the drivers on the steppers to get the right current, and this thing will be killer, because again, I've already shown in the microscope, line for line, this thing is doing the job just like the Creality. It's got more features than the Creality. It's nicer looking than the Creality. I mean, yes, folks, I think this is the Creality killer. And if you have enough wherewithal to buy the Creality and modify it, you can have the same and probably easier to modify it. Now, opening up the bottom is probably going to be a little bit more difficult than opening up the bottom of the Creality to reset the drivers. But again, everything here is very doable. Before I redo the drivers, though, I am going to reflash with Marlin. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to do another video on this, and I'm going to see if that changes around the pawn top with, again, how it handles the arc. But everything else is just straight up as good, or if not better, than the CR-10. So again, for $6 more, wouldn't you rather have another Z-axis, a capacitive color touchscreen, added features, the potential for Wi-Fi in the future? Sort of the list goes on and on. So when I call this a CR-10 killer, I really believe that this is CR-10 killer, and here's the proof in the pudding. So anyways, hopefully you found this video interesting. If you did, give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget, the swag shop's going to be up there. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. Let me know about some other tests. This is not going to be the end of the test. I wanted to do a sort of Joe Average head-to-head shootout between the two out of the box and see what I came up with. I think there are other tests to do. And again, I didn't want to get too big on bridging tests and everything, because that's all going to be filament and setting dependent, and both of these guys are pretty much similar mechanically, so that's sort of a waste of time. I wanted to go price, features, performance, out of the box. Anyways, see you guys in the next video. Cheers.
Please click like below and subscribe to the channel.